Talk to me about the start and penalties. I saw in your review video that you said the biggest injustice was the 10-second penalty that Lewis got, to which
Lewis didn't deserve a
Hamilton,
penalty for anything.
yeah,
Ferrari should have got a fine for not giving Lewis the right information on how to pace himself relative to the cars behind when he rejoined the track. That was something to do with Lewis. How's he supposed to do that? I mean, every other team does that. I don't understand what Ferrari were thinking in not giving him that information. And no, of all the people out there who did not deserve a penalty for anything that happened, it was Lewis Hamilton. He was completely innocent in all cases. Yeah, he outbraked himself, but he wasn't involved in anybody else into turn 4. But going into the first corner, though, of the race, Lewis was fabulous, wasn't he? Down the inside of Charles. Everything was set up for a really good Lewis Hamilton race. And the problem for Max was that it was Charles that he was having to sort of try and pass on the outside and not Lewis, because Charles is going to move over on you. He always does. That's one of the Charles things that he's done all his life. And it's, one day it's going to end in tears, I'm afraid. But he did it again, and Max was up on the curbs and blah, 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 and did a good job with the rejoin, I thought. And but the ludicrous thing about the Lewis thing was that a few laps later at turn 4 was that Max had dive bombed him, and Max was going to give the position back to Lewis. I'm sure he was at turn 4. But Lewis didn't realise that. Maybe he was caught by surprise and just outbraked himself and went down the outside of turn 4. And that's when all the trouble started, because then Max was completely discombobulated by the whole thing, nearly took out George, as a result of which Kimi and Oliver Behrman sneaked through. It was a complete mess, really. And it all because, I think, because Max was about to trying to give the position back to Lewis, starting with that silly dive bomb, which he shouldn't have done on the mediums on Lewis. That was not on that pass, in my view. And I think Max he was lucky not to get a penalty for the George thing at turn 4. And I think Charles should have got a penalty for what happened in turn 1.
I bet you get a penalty and you get a penalty. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let me constructively push back on the Lewis thing. I completely agree with you. I think Lewis, 5-second penalty at best, never a 10-second.
Well, no penalty, really. As I say, this is a classic example. It's a bit like the driver of the leader of the world championship has to start the last race with a 10-place grid penalty because something's happened to his power unit, nothing to do with him. And that's wrong. The drivers get the penalty sometimes, and it's incorrect. They need to look at that. They need to look at the radio and see that Ferrari did not give Lewis the information he should have had.
I don't want to blame Lewis as the victim in this FIA ineptitude scenario. However, Peter, like when I used to kart under yellow flags, it was always the skullduggerous thing to do was to wave your hand to allow the marshals to see that, listen, I know that there's yellow flags. Meanwhile, burying your foot deep in the throttle with a view to catch the person in front. Max did something similar. I think we can argue back and forth whether Max deserved the penalty, potentially. But Max's gift is that his devilment is sufficient to where he'll make the judges, the stewards, the race director make a decision. And he did that by coming off the throttle. He gave all the places back, and apart from George. And I'd argue that Lewis should have come off the throttle and not given back the places necessarily, but at least done one of these right, a euphemistic. I know that I went down the runoff area, shouldn't have done that. Do you see me, race director? I am now allowing the guys behind me to catch up, so I have definitely not gained an advantage. Do you think there's something to that, Peter?
Well, I think you can do that if you've let people past and it's pretty obvious. But bear in mind how frenetic they are at race control. I think to try to give a signal from the cockpit to the race director about how you've tried your best to make the gap what it should be is a little bit of a stretch. I'm not sure the race director is going to have enough time to think that one through in the way he would if he just saw cars physically passing. So I'm not sure that that's right. I mean, bottom line is they don't have a Jonathan Wheatley at Ferrari, do they?
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. They probably do, and he's called Jock Clear, but they don't allow him to do very much. So that's that.
Soon.
But, they don't have somebody. I always imagine Freddie Vasseur was that guy. Again, I'm slightly disappointed that he's not. But somebody should have been down there saying, our mistake, we're going to tell Lewis now, whatever, however you want to fudge it with your karting thing at Rye House, still flat out on the throttle, Cameron under the yellow flags. However you want to fudge it, make sure that you've got somebody in race control who knows what they're talking about, who can do that. But to rely on Lewis to do that, I don't think I think that's a bit much, really, expect him to do that.
Yeah, I suppose Max did it though. If you imagine, Peter, if Max had done what Lewis did and just buried his foot in the throttle after running down the runoff area, granted he gained more places than did Lewis, but
but then GP would have been on the radio saying no, okay, go now, Lewis, go Max. It would have been managed. It wouldn't have been up to Max completely. No way. Yeah. That's the difference between Red Bull, which I always say is a fabulous racing team in general, and the rest, and Ferrari certainly, and McLaren probably, and maybe even Mercedes for that matter.
Fair cop. No, it's a shame. I'd hoped that Lewis would break his 19 race duck.
Yeah, I did too, and I think he could have been. I think he could have been right up there today. Yesterday. I think he drove really well, and he was in good shape. Again, it would have been nice to have seen him starting on medium, see what would have happened. But anyway, we never had that. Oof. I'm still shocked that Piastri was on softs at the start. I just don't get that. It didn't help him at all, as totally predicted. In the same way, it didn't help Max to be on softs in Singapore. Didn't help at all.
Yeah. You spoke about GP, Peter. I don't know if you saw the portion where GP was asking Hannah Schmitz, I guess, or another strategist on the wall, are we on?
Yeah, I thought that was very cool. I thought it was like, strategy. Okay, what are we doing about strategy? It's like this guy's, he's a much higher level of operation with Max about how to get the mediums to work and things they can try on the car. Yeah, strategy, who cares about that? We got our own team there. And I thought that was quite good. I'm sure a lot of people will give him a hard time, and I've had a few mates WhatsApp me saying, I can't believe this guy didn't know what strategy they were on. But fair enough, that's the way the race teams are today. I obviously gave Hannah a very hard time after Spain, and I gave her a hard time indirectly in Singapore as well for the tyre choice. I don't know if she was involved in that tyre choice, but certainly the Spanish thing, I think, was probably due to her or due to the strategy department. But I got to give credit to the Red Bull strategy department from Mexico, because they were absolutely spot on, lap perfect in terms of how to manage that as a one-stop strategy for Max and how to get the best out of the soft tyre. Just brilliant. Well, they didn't predict the VSC at the end. I suppose you've got to give them a failure for that. Isn't that what strategy departments are supposed to do? I think I got a lot of time for GP. I think he and Max have just got this thing where they've just got this incredible rapport. I think Max said, unless he's there on my car, I ain't staying at Red Bull, did he not? I think that's the story. And fair enough, the guy's so good. And he's so good that, what strategy? One stop, right. But give Max credit, though. What a catch in post-race, eh? To say, oh, no, that was all to do with Yuki. That was a great catch by Max. I don't know how many people were taken in by that one, but
no,
that shows how much of a racer he is too.
He's never going to throw his big
and he probably wasn't even briefed about that. He's probably thought that through himself. If I get a question about that, I'm just going to look after my mate GP.
He circles the wagons very nicely. He's never
and we shouldn't forget that happens quite a lot. And I'm not sure that I made the point in the video. It happens quite a lot, and they put it out because it is Max. But I'm not sure that sort of stuff should be out there in the public domain, because it's fairly private. We are getting access to their private radio in effect, and if they make a mistake like that, is it appropriate for Formula One just to blare that out around the world? I'm not sure that it is. And I'm the guy saying that we should have a drive to survive for the engineers and for the mechanics and for the sponsorship people and for the logistics people and maybe for the FIA even, that all these layers that we should be bringing to the surface. But I've always had the rejoinder that it's up to the director and the producer to make sure that nothing insensitive is ever put out. And that's not a difficult thing to do, in my opinion, if you understand Formula One and you can walk into the pit lane and you can sniff the air and you know what's going to happen next. Racers, I'm talking about. That's not difficult to do. For people that know nothing about Formula One, it's incredibly difficult. But here was an example of, if we did have a drive to survive for the engineering department behind the teams, that's the sort of thing that should not be put out, in my opinion. There's lots of other great stuff that should be, but not that. Not when there's a human error like that. Because we're all human and we all make mistakes. And what's the point of, capitalizing on that?